Hey there, friends. Welcome back to the Productive Entrepreneur Podcast. Today, we're diving into something I know so many of you struggle with: planning and executing those big, scary projects without feeling completely overwhelmed. You know what I'm talking about, right? Those projects that make you excited, but also make your heart race a little because they seem so enormous. And let me tell you, I've been exactly where you are. In fact, I'm embarking on a big, scary project myself, creating and launching 30 podcast episodes in 30 days. Yes, you heard that right. This is day one of that journey. I know it sounds crazy, right? But stick with me because I'm going to share exactly how I planned this massive undertaking, and more importantly, how you can apply those same strategies to any big project that you're dreaming about. Think of this as your behind-the-scenes look at how I prepared for this challenge. You're listening to the Productive Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Tanya Kendrick, and I'm on a mission to help online business owners like you focus on the right things and take imperfect action. Every week, you'll get my best tips on everything from time management and content creation to planning effectively and managing mindset issues, all in an effort to help you become more productive. So let's jump into this episode. Before we dive in, I want you to think about a project that you've been putting off. Maybe it's launching that course that you've been thinking about, writing your book, or completely overhauling your business systems. Whatever it is, keep it in mind as we work through today's episode, because I'm going to give you the exact framework I use to turn those overwhelming projects into manageable, achievable goals. The idea for my 30-day podcast challenge actually came from my experience with NaNoWriMo a few years ago. And for those of you who aren't familiar, that stands for National Novel Writing Month. And it's when you write a novel in a month. We're talking 30,000 words. NaNoWriMo takes place every year in November. And so I was thinking about participating again, maybe, but I wanted to do something a little different. I didn't want to write a book, but I wanted to do some kind of content project. And around the same time I was thinking about this, I was doing yoga one day. And the yoga channel that I watch on YouTube does these 30-day yoga journeys. And I thought, hey, what about a 30-day podcast journey? So here we are. I knew that if I wanted to pull this off, I would need to be super intentional about how I approached it. So I made some key decisions up front. I decided to keep the episodes shorter, about 10 to 15 minutes each instead of my usual 20 to 25 minutes per episode. I also chose to spend the month of October on prep work rather than creating any new content. That's something that came out of my NaNoWriMo experience. They call it Preptober. Let me tell you why this prep phase is so crucial. When you're doing something as intense as creating daily long-form content, you can't afford to waste time wondering what to do next or getting stuck in decision fatigue. Every minute counts. So I used the resources from my content planning toolkit and tweaked them a little bit to fit this challenge. And FYI, I'll drop a link to the content planning toolkit in the show notes, and you'll find all of the links and resources mentioned there as well. I also know myself well enough to recognize my tendency to overthink things. So I brainstormed a list of all the places I tend to get stuck in overthinking or perfectionism, and I tackled as many of them as possible during the prep month. This list included things like outlines. I batched all the outlines in 2 sittings. I gave myself a time limit to get them all done in 2 hours. Titles. I get stuck on titles. So I wrote all the titles in one batch. This was after I had the outlines in place. and deciding what kind of Instagram posts to share. Now, that may not seem like a big deal, but it's a task where I often get stuck. So I just went ahead and made those decisions and wrote them down, and I don't have to think about that again. This was honestly really good because it means that I'm not allowing my perfectionist brain to take over. I gave myself permission to be imperfect throughout this project. And by the way, if overthinking content is something that you struggle with, I talk more about that in episode 15 of the podcast, and I'll drop a link to that episode in the show notes. Before we dive into the how-to, let's talk about two major pitfalls that can derail even the most exciting projects. The first one is underplanning. You know that saying from Ben Franklin, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail? It's so true. And I see this all the time with my students. They get so excited about an idea that they just jump right in. And while that enthusiasm is great, without proper planning, you might suddenly realize that the project is way bigger or more complex than you thought. That's when overwhelm kicks in and projects end up being abandoned. Let me share a quick story about this. Last year, one of my students in my content planning course contacted me, and she was just super excited about launching a membership site. She had the passion, the expertise, and she even had some of her content ready to go. But she had jumped into it without really planning the tech setup or the content delivery schedule. She was 3 months in and she was completely overwhelmed trying to manage all the things, the tech, the content, trying to serve her members all at once. And so she reached out to me for advice, and I suggested that she pause everything and create a proper project plan. And that actually saved her time in the long run. But here's the flip side, and I've totally been guilty of this one. Over-planning can be just as problematic. You can get so caught up in making everything perfect that you never actually start, or you don't even have time to start. You plan everything down to the tiniest detail only to have circumstances change, forcing you to waste time replanning everything. So what's the sweet spot? Well, I've found that breaking any big project into distinct phases is super helpful. So let me walk you through each phase and show you exactly how I applied this to my 30-day podcast challenge. Phase 1 is brainstorming. This is where you let your creativity run wild. For my podcast project, I created a high-level content map spreadsheet. I reviewed all of my existing blog posts for potential repurposing opportunities. That was the low-hanging fruit. The key here with any type of brainstorming is to write everything down. Don't judge your ideas yet. Just get them all out of your head. Also during this phase for my 30-day challenge, I generated a 52-week content plan from Marketing Magic, which is one of my favorite AI tools. The 52-week content plan helped me fill in the gaps and create a well-rounded plan for 30 episodes that covers all of my content pillars. And I'll drop a link to Marketing Magic in the show notes. But here's what really made the brainstorming phase so powerful. I didn't just think about content. I thought about all the potential roadblocks and challenges too. What if I got sick? What if my mic broke? What if I ran into issues with my editing software? And since this is November, what will I do for Thanksgiving? Because I don't want to have to worry about creating an episode on Thanksgiving Day. So I pre-planned, what am I going to do about that? All of this might sound negative, but trust me, acknowledging and planning for potential problems actually reduces anxiety and makes you more confident in your plan. Phase 2 is research and decision making. This is the phase that a lot of people skip, but it's actually crucial. For my project, I reviewed my existing podcast metrics so that I would understand what resonates with my audience. I created a modified workflow template specifically for these shorter episodes, and I really streamlined and cut out all of the extras and the nice to-dos. I also analyzed my best performing content to identify patterns and themes. However, this phase isn't just about gathering information, it's about making informed decisions. For example, my research showed that my audience particularly loves episodes that combine practical tips with personal stories. So this insight shaped how I structured the outlines for each of the 30 episodes. Here's a pro tip. Use your research and decision-making phase to create what I call decision filters. These are criteria that help you make quick decisions later in the project. For my podcast challenge, I created 3 specific decision filters. First, does this content fill gaps in my existing inventory? This is going to help me fill out pillars that are a little light. Second, does this content relate well to my paid offers? Because let's be honest, we're running businesses here. And third, can I create this content quickly without doing extensive episode-level research? This will be crucial for maintaining the daily pace of the challenge. Having these clear filters made it so much easier to choose topics, and it will enable me to stick to my production schedule. Phase 3 is planning. This is where we get tactical, and I'm going to break it down into 3 key steps. 1, break the project into milestones. For my podcast challenge, I created 30 content packs up front, 1 for each episode. This took about 45 minutes total, but it will eliminate so much daily friction as I go through the next 30 days. Each content pack includes the episode outline, meta information like the episode number, target keyword, meta description for the show notes, that kind of information. It has repurposing ideas for social media, and it has all of the links to include in the show notes. And by the way, my content pack template is one of the tools included in my content planning toolkit that I mentioned earlier. Next, focus on 1 milestone at a time. I set up my project in chunks: project planning, content planning, admin setup, and batch creation of graphics. Each milestone had its own focus time, which prevented that overwhelming feeling of trying to juggle everything at once. So during my prep month, this is how I structured my milestones. Week 1 was project planning. Week 2 was content planning and outline creation. Week 3 was admin setup and streamlining workflow. And week 4 was graphics for the show notes pages and for Pinterest and Instagram. Next, create specific action steps. Instead of vague tasks like prep podcast, I broke everything down into super specific steps. Create 30 Asana tasks, 1 for each episode. Set up 30 folder structures in Dropbox. This is, tedious stuff that I could just go ahead and get out of the way. Create all my featured images in 1 Canva document. Draft standard AI prompts to use for the show notes and for social media. Pre-plan all of my social media posts. And create email announcement templates. The magic happens when you make these action steps so specific that there's no room for confusion or procrastination. For example, instead of create graphics, my task read, create 30 graphics using the featured image template in Canva. Next is phase 4, and that's execution. Now, here's the beautiful part about doing all of this prep work. When it comes time to actually execute your project, it should feel almost effortless. I know that might sound pie in the sky, but stay with me here. When you've done the work up front to create these clear action steps, set up your systems, and batched similar tasks together, Execution becomes more about following your roadmap than making constant decisions. Think about it like this. Have you ever followed a recipe where you gathered and measured all of your ingredients before starting to cook? That's called mise en place in cooking, and it's exactly what we're doing here with project planning. For my podcast challenge, execution looks like this. I open my computer each morning, check my content map for the day, and get straight to work. No wondering what I'm going to record, no scrambling to create graphics, no last-minute panic about show notes. Everything is templated, systematized, and ready to go. My only job during execution is to show up and do the work, meaning record the episode, then edit and publish it. And then the follow-up steps of announcing it to my email list, posting on Instagram, sharing it with my private community, those types of things. Execution, or as I like to call it, working the plan, is so much easier when you're not also trying to make 1,000 tiny decisions at the same time. Here's what makes execution smooth. Every task is specific and actionable. Templates are ready to go. Graphics are pre-designed or even pre-created. Systems are set up and tested. Folders are organized and waiting. And promotional content is pre-planned. The key is to trust the process you've created. Yes, things might come up that require adjustments. That's just life. But because you've done such a thorough preparation, you have the mental space and energy to handle those curveballs when they come your way. Now let me give you some concrete steps to tackle your next big project. 1, start with your why. Write down your project's purpose and how it aligns with your bigger goals. Keep this visible throughout the project. I like to add this as a note in my Asana project. Ask yourself, how does this project serve my audience? What problem does it solve? How does it fit into my larger business vision? And what specific outcomes am I hoping to achieve? 2, set your boundaries. Decide upfront what success looks like and what you won't compromise on. For me, an important boundary was not letting work on an episode carry over to the next day, because I knew that if I did let work carry over, I wouldn't be able to keep up the pace of 1 episode per day. I would get behind and then I would just get completely overwhelmed. So consider, what are your non-negotiables? What resources, time, money, energy are you willing to invest? What sacrifices are you not willing to make? And how will you maintain work-life balance during the project? 3, create your project framework. Break your project into major milestones. Assign rough deadlines to each milestone. Then focus on 1 milestone at a time and break each milestone into specific, actionable tasks. Then create accountability checkpoints and don't forget to build in buffer time for unexpected challenges. 4, set up your systems. Choose your project management tool. I use Asana. Create templates for recurring tasks. Set up your folder structure to organize your project assets. Batch similar tasks together. Automate what you can, and document your processes as you go. 5, plan for obstacles. Think about what might trip you up and plan solutions in advance. I mentioned earlier that I brainstormed a list of everything that tends to push me into overthinking and perfectionism. And I came up with a plan to deal with those areas ahead of time. So consider, what are your typical stumbling blocks? Where might you need help or support? What backup plans should you have in place And how will you handle unexpected setbacks? Remember, the goal isn't perfect planning, it's effective planning. You don't need to have everything figured out before you start. What you need is a clear framework that gives you confidence and keeps you moving forward. I want you to take action on this right away. Grab your notebook or open a new document and write down that big project that you've been thinking about. Then use the framework we discussed today to start breaking it down into phases and actionable steps. And I've got something special for you. It's my project plan checklist, which will be super helpful, especially if you're new to project planning. It will help you make sure that you've covered all the bases. You can download it for free from the show notes. Remember, you don't have to do this alone. Share your project plans with me over on Instagram at Tanya Kendrick. I would love seeing what you're working on so that I can cheer you on. I'll be back tomorrow with day 2 of 30 podcasts in 30 days, and I'll be sharing 5 effective strategies to beat procrastination. Have a good rest of your day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. And before you go, if you like what you hear on the Productive Entrepreneur podcast, then come check out the Organized Business Toolbox. It's my monthly membership for solo entrepreneurs who want to feel in control and take imperfect action to move their businesses forward. When you join, you'll get instant access to the Training and Resource Vault, and a new toolbox or course drops every month. Plus, we have monthly Voxer office hours where you can privately ask me questions and get my direct feedback. If that sounds like something you need, the link is in the show notes, or visit TanyaKendrick.com, and I'll see you on the inside.